Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We're all about getting you the knowledge you need quickly, and I think today's topic is one that a lot of you have probably been looking forward to.
Yeah, scaffolding is one of those concepts that just pops up everywhere in education, so it's great that we're going to dig into it today.
Exactly. I mean, you hear it all the time, but do you really know what it means? Really? So, for this deep dive, we're going to look at scaffolding in the context of teacher-student interactions, and we're going to base it on this review article that looks at the research from the last decade.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Yeah. So, we're going to try to hit three main areas: the core characteristics of scaffolding, like what actually makes something scaffolding. Then we'll look at how it shows up in the classroom in practice.
Okay.
And then finally, we'll tackle the big question: how effective is scaffolding really?
Right. Does it actually work? Everyone says it does, but...
Exactly. Okay, so first, what is scaffolding? Let's just start there.
Well, like a lot of stuff in education, you can't really talk about scaffolding without talking about Vygotsky, specifically his sociocultural theory.
Right, that whole idea of learning being a social process, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's that learning is guided by others. It's not just something you do on your own in isolation.
Which makes sense when you think about it. Like, nobody learns in a vacuum.
Exactly.
So how does this tie into scaffolding specifically? Like, when did people start using that term?
Well, the term scaffolding itself, at least in this educational context, really took off with Wood, Bruner, and Ross back in 1976. They used it to describe how adults can help kids solve problems together.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about teachers and students. It can be any situation where someone more knowledgeable is supporting someone who's still learning.
Absolutely, yeah. And they were really emphasizing the idea that it's temporary support. It's there to help the learner do something they couldn't do on their own, but the goal is for them to eventually be able to do it independently.
Right, like the scaffolding on a building. It's there to help during construction, but once the building is finished, it comes down.
Precisely.
So it's not just about like doing the task for the student, it's about giving them just enough support so they can do it themselves.
Right, and it's also not just a one-way street, like the teacher just telling the student what to do. Stone, in 1993, emphasized how important it is for it to be a really interactive process.
Yeah.
Where both the teacher and the student are actively involved in building understanding together.
Oh, that's interesting. So the student is actually participating in the construction of their own knowledge, not just passively receiving information.
Exactly.
I like that. And is it always the same kind of support, or does it vary depending on like the task or the student?
Oh, it definitely varies. Scaffolding isn't a one-size-fits-all thing at all. You have to adjust it based on what the student needs in that moment.
Okay, so how do you know what kind of support to give? What are the factors that influence that?
Well, the type of task is a big one. Like, is it a well-structured task where there's a clear process and a right answer? Or is it a more ill-structured task where there's more room for interpretation and creativity?
Right, that makes sense. So you would scaffold differently depending on whether it's a math problem or like a creative writing assignment.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the student's response is crucial. Like, how are they approaching the task? Where are they getting stuck? What are they already understanding?
So it's really about constantly assessing where the student is at and adjusting your support accordingly.
Yeah, it's a very dynamic process.
Right.
And, all of this ties back to Vygotsky's concept of the zone of proximal development.
The ZPD, right, I've heard of that.
Yeah. It's basically the space between what a learner can do on their own and what they can do with guidance. So scaffolding is all about providing that support within the ZPD to help the student reach that next level of understanding or skill.
Oh, I see. So it's about helping them move from what they can do with help to what they can eventually do independently.
Exactly.
I'm starting to get a clearer picture now. But, I have heard some people say that the term scaffolding gets thrown around too much. Like it's become a catch-all phrase for any kind of support in the classroom.
Yeah, that's a valid point. In fact, even Stone himself raised concerns about that. Like, he was worried that the original meaning of the metaphor was getting lost.
Yeah.
And that people were using it to describe just any kind of teacher-directed instruction.
So it's almost like it's lost its specificity. If everything is scaffolding, then what does the term even really mean?
Right. And that's why it's important to be clear about what we're talking about when we say scaffolding. Like, for our purposes, we're really focusing on that direct face-to-face interaction between the teacher and the student.
Right, where the student is actively participating in the learning process, not just passively listening to a lecture.
Exactly. And that brings us to those core characteristics of scaffolding, the things that really distinguish it from other types of support.
Okay, so what are those key characteristics?
Our review found three that consistently popped up in the research: contingency, fading, and transfer of responsibility.
Okay, those sound kind of technical. Let's break them down. What does contingency mean in this context?
So contingency means that the support is responsive to the student's needs. It's not just a pre-planned script that the teacher follows, regardless of how the student is doing.
Oh, I see. So the teacher is constantly assessing the student's understanding and adjusting their support accordingly.
Exactly. They're tailoring their support to the student's current performance level, meeting them where they're at.
Okay, that makes sense. And how do teachers do that? Like, what are some of the strategies they use to be contingent?
Well, there's a whole range of diagnostic strategies that come into play.
Mm.
Things like dynamic assessment, formative assessment, online diagnosis, even just closely monitoring the student's responses.
Right, it's like the teacher is constantly gathering clues to understand what's going on in the student's mind.
Yeah, exactly. And then the second key characteristic is fading.
Fading, okay. Tell me more about that.
So fading basically means gradually withdrawing the support as the student starts to grasp the concept or skill.
So you don't just keep the same level of support the whole time.
No, definitely not. The goal is to make yourself less and less necessary over time. Like, as the student becomes more competent, you provide less and less direct assistance.
Okay, and I guess the pace of that fading would depend on the student's individual progress, right?
Absolutely. It's not a set timeline. You have to be really attuned to when the student is ready to take on more responsibility.
Oh, makes sense. And then the third characteristic, transfer of responsibility. What does that involve?
That's kind of the ultimate goal of scaffolding, right?
Yeah.
Like, you want the student to eventually be able to do the task completely on their own.
So the responsibility for completing the task gradually shifts from the teacher to the student.
Exactly. And you can see this happening when the student starts to take more control of the learning process. They're asking more questions, they're initiating ideas, they're making decisions about how to approach the task.
So it's not just about completing that one specific task, it's about developing their ability to learn independently.
Yeah, it's about fostering those metacognitive skills,
Yeah,
the ability to plan, monitor, and evaluate their own learning.
right. So scaffolding isn't just about content, it's about process too. It's about teaching them how to learn.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that those three characteristics, contingency, fading, and transfer of responsibility, are really what distinguish scaffolding from other types of support.
Mhm.
Like, if you're just modeling something once without adapting to the student's response or expecting them to eventually do it on their own, that's not really scaffolding.
Okay, that's a good point. It's not just about the specific strategies you use, it's about how you use them.
Exactly.
So now that we have a better understanding of what scaffolding is, let's move on to how it actually looks in practice. Like, what are teachers doing in the classroom to scaffold student learning?
Right. So over the past decade, researchers have been really interested in describing and understanding the different ways teachers scaffold.
And what have they found? Like, are there specific strategies that teachers use?
Well, they've developed some frameworks for analyzing scaffolding strategies, which is really helpful. Like, one framework distinguishes between the means of scaffolding and the intentions behind those means.
Okay, so the means is like the how, the specific techniques or actions the teacher takes, and the intention is the what, the goal they're trying to achieve.
Exactly. And this framework identifies 5 main intentions behind scaffolding: direction maintenance, cognitive structuring, reduction of degrees of freedom, recruitment, and contingency management or frustration control.
Wow, that's a lot. Let's go through them one by one. What's direction maintenance?
So direction maintenance is all about keeping the student focused on the learning goal, making sure they're on track and making progress.
Okay, so it's like the teacher is helping the student stay organized and monitor their own learning process.
Exactly. And then there's cognitive structuring, where the teacher provides frameworks or explanations to help the student make sense of the information.
So like providing graphic organizers or breaking down a complex concept into smaller chunks.
Yeah, things like that. And then there's reduction of degrees of freedom, where the teacher takes on some aspects of the task to make it simpler for the student.
Oh, I see. So like if you're teaching students to write an essay, you might provide them with pre-written outlines so they can focus on the content rather than the structure.
Exactly. And then we have recruitment, which is all about getting the student interested and motivated.
Right, so that's tapping into their affect, their emotional response to the learning.
Yes. And finally, there's contingency management, which is sometimes called frustration control. This is where the teacher provides support to help the student manage their emotions, especially when they're struggling.
Okay, so like offering encouragement or praise when the student is getting frustrated.
Exactly. And then on the means side, The framework identifies 6 common ways that teachers scaffold: feeding back, hints, instructing, explaining, modeling, and questioning.
Okay, those sound familiar. Let's go through them quickly. What's feeding back?
Feedback is just giving the student information about their performance,
Yeah.
how they're doing in relation to the learning goals.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And hints.
Hints are like little clues or suggestions that can help the student figure something out without giving them the answer directly.
Right, it's like nudging them in the right direction. And instructing.
Instructing is more direct. It's telling the student what to do or how to do something.
Okay. And explaining.
Explaining is like providing more details or clarification about something.
Right, so it's going deeper than just instructing. And modeling.
Modeling is showing the student how to do something, demonstrating a skill or a process.
Okay. And finally, questioning.
Questioning is using questions to prompt the student's thinking and encourage them to articulate their understanding.
Right. It's not just about asking questions to check for comprehension. It's about using questions strategically to guide the learning process.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that these means and intentions can be combined in different ways to create all sorts of scaffolding strategies.
Oh, I see. So like modeling could be used for direction maintenance if you're showing the student how to plan their work.
Exactly. Or it could be used for cognitive structuring if you're modeling how to solve a problem.
Right. So the same technique can be used for different purposes depending on the context and the student's needs.
Exactly.
And I guess the student's response is also really important in determining whether something is actually scaffolding, right? Like if the student doesn't engage with the support, it's not really doing its job.
Absolutely. Scaffolding is all about that interaction between the teacher and the student.
Right. It's a two-way street.
Exactly. So a lot of the research in the past decade has been focused on describing how scaffolding looks in practice. Researchers have been going into classrooms, observing teacher-student interactions, and trying to understand the different ways teachers naturally scaffold learning.
And what have they found? Like, are there any common themes or patterns?
Well, a lot of these studies have used grounded theory to analyze their data, which means they're building theories based on their observations rather than testing pre-existing hypotheses.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're letting the data speak for itself.
Exactly. And they've come up with some really rich descriptions of scaffolding in action. Like some studies have focused on how teachers scaffold literacy skills, things like reading and writing.
Right. That makes sense. Literacy is such a fundamental skill.
Yeah, and other studies have looked at how teachers scaffold student engagement, how they keep students interested and motivated.
Oh, that's a tough one. Engagement is so important, but it can be hard to achieve, especially with certain students.
It is, yeah. And some studies have even looked at how teachers scaffold the development of students' identities as learners.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. So like helping them see themselves as capable and confident learners.
Exactly.
So it seems like scaffolding can play a role in a lot of different aspects of learning.
Yeah, it really can. And a lot of these descriptive studies have resulted in lists of specific strategies that teachers use.
Oh, like a toolbox of scaffolding techniques.
Yeah, kind of. So you'll see things like modeling, of course, but
Yeah.
also instructing, explaining, questioning, praising, repeating information, even giving scolds sometimes.
Right. It's a pretty diverse set of strategies. And I guess the specific strategies that teachers use would depend on the context, right?
Definitely. And we see that distinction between the what and the how coming up again and again in these studies. Like researchers are identifying teachers who are primarily scaffolding conceptual understanding or strategy use or even emotional regulation.
So it's not just about what you do, it's about why you do it.
Exactly. And the sheer number of these descriptive studies suggests that this has been a really important phase of research in the last decade. Like we've been trying to get a handle on what's actually happening in classrooms.
Right. Kind of mapping the territory.
Yeah, exactly. But now that we have a better understanding of how teachers are already scaffolding, we can start to move towards more targeted studies that test specific hypotheses.
Oh, that's exciting. So like instead of just observing what's happening, we can start to design interventions and see what works best.
Exactly. And we're already seeing some studies that are taking a more experimental approach, like some researchers are using predefined coding schemes to analyze scaffolding, which allows them to compare different teaching approaches more systematically.
Right. So they're starting with a clear idea of what they're looking for and how to measure it.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really promising is that we're seeing more and more research that's focusing on those core characteristics of scaffolding: contingency, fading, and transfer of responsibility.
Oh, that's great. So researchers are really starting to zero in on what makes scaffolding effective.
Yeah, exactly. Like some studies are looking at how teachers adapt their support in response to student understanding, how they actually operationalize contingency in the classroom.
Right, because it's one thing to say that contingency is important. It's another thing to actually measure it and see how it plays out in real interactions.
Exactly. And other studies are looking at how teachers fade their support and how that impacts student learning and motivation.
Oh, that's interesting. Because fading too quickly could backfire. Right.
Yeah, it
Okay.
could definitely lead to frustration and disengagement. So it's all about finding that sweet spot.
And then there are studies looking at how responsibility is transferred from the teacher to the student.
Yeah, and how that impacts things like student independence, self-regulation, and motivation.
So it seems like there's a lot of exciting research happening in this area.
There is, yeah. And it's really helping us to understand how to make scaffolding more effective.
Okay, so we've talked about what scaffolding is and how it looks in practice, but the big question is, does it actually work?
Right, that's the million-dollar question.
Exactly. So let's delve into the research on the effectiveness of scaffolding.
Okay, sounds good.
So how do researchers even measure the effectiveness of scaffolding? Like, what are they looking at?
Well, to really determine whether scaffolding is effective, we need to look at studies that are designed to draw causal inferences.
Right, so we can say with confidence that scaffolding is causing the observed outcomes, not just correlated with them.
Exactly. So that means looking at experimental studies, quasi-experimental studies, and some types of correlational studies that use sophisticated statistical techniques.
Okay, and what are those studies actually measuring? Like, what are the outcomes they're looking at?
Well, the main focus is on student outcomes, of course. Like, did the use of scaffolding lead to improvements in student learning, motivation, engagement, or any other relevant outcome?
Right, so it's not just about whether the teacher is scaffolding, it's about whether that scaffolding is actually having a positive impact on the student.
Exactly. And when we look at the research, we see that scaffolding has been shown to be effective in supporting a wide range of outcomes.
Oh, that's good to hear. Can you give me some specific examples?
Sure. So for example, there's research on the effectiveness of scaffolding for metacognitive activities.
Metacognitive, okay. Remind me what that means again.
It's basically thinking about thinking,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
planning, monitoring, and evaluating your own learning process.
Right, those higher level thinking skills.
Exactly. So one study by Mercer and his colleagues looked at a program called Thinking Together, which involved training teachers to scaffold students' use of exploratory talk.
Exploratory talk, what's that?
It's basically a way of talking about your thinking that helps you to understand concepts more deeply.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so in this program, teachers were trained to use specific scaffolding strategies, like asking constructive questions and modeling their own thinking.
And what did they find?
They found that this approach led to significant improvements in students' reasoning skills, even in areas of nonverbal reasoning.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So explicitly teaching students how to talk about their thinking can actually make them better thinkers?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And another study by Azevedo and his team looked at the impact of adaptive human scaffolding in a hypermedia environment.
Hypermedia, so like a digital learning environment.
Exactly. And they found that when students received scaffolding that was tailored to their individual learning needs, they showed greater shifts in their mental models and greater knowledge gains compared to students who received either fixed scaffolding or no scaffolding at all.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about any kind of scaffolding, it's about providing the right kind of scaffolding at the right time.
Exactly. And then there's research on the effectiveness of scaffolding for cognitive activities.
Cognitive, okay. So that's the actual learning of content and skills.
Right. So one meta-analysis by Swanson and Lussier look at different forms of dynamic assessment, which often incorporate scaffolding techniques.
Dynamic assessment, what's that?
It's a way of assessing a student's learning potential by providing them with support and guidance during the assessment process.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about measuring what they already know, it's about measuring how well they can learn with support.
Exactly. And their meta-analysis found that scaffolding was an effective form of dynamic assessment, although strategy training tended to have even larger effect sizes.
Okay, so like explicitly teaching students learning strategies.
Yeah, things like how to take notes, how to summarize information, how to self-test.
Right, so it seems like scaffolding can be even more effective when it's combined with explicit instruction in learning strategies.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there have also been a lot of studies on the effectiveness of scaffolding in one-to-one tutoring contexts.
One-to-one tutoring. Okay, so that's a very individualized form of support.
It is, yeah. And one study by Murphy and Messer found that scaffolding in a one-to-one setting was more effective than either collaborative group work or independent work in helping young children understand the principles of a balanced scale task.
A balanced scale task, so like a science experiment.
Yeah, kind of. And what's really interesting is that they also looked at whether the students were able to transfer their learning to new situations.
Oh, right, because transfer is the ultimate goal, right? You want them to be able to use what they've learned in different contexts.
Exactly. And they found that the students who received scaffolding were more successful at transferring their learning.
Wow, that's really promising. And another study by Pratt and Savoy-Levine looked at the impact of contingent support on students' ability to solve long division problems. Long division, oh boy, that brings back memories.
Right. And they found that providing contingent support, mainly through modeling and hints, significantly improved students' problem-solving abilities, both immediately after the intervention and in follow-up assessments.
So the effects were lasting, not just short-term.
Exactly. And another interesting study by Chu and her colleagues looked at the effectiveness of the cognitive apprenticeship model, which incorporates scaffolding as a central element.
Cognitive apprenticeship. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
So it's basically a model of teaching and learning that's based on the idea of apprenticeship, like how traditional craftspeople learn their trade.
Oh, I see. So it's about learning through observation, imitation, and guided practice.
Exactly. And in this study, they found that a cognitive apprenticeship approach was more effective than traditional tutoring in promoting conceptual change in the difficult area of chemical equilibrium.
Chemical equilibrium. Wow, that's a tough one. So it seems like scaffolding can be helpful even for very complex concepts.
Yeah, it can. And finally, Chi and her team conducted a study comparing different styles of tutoring.
Okay, so like different approaches to providing support.
Yeah, exactly. And they found that while both non-interactive tutoring, which is more like traditional lecture-style teaching, and interactive tutoring, which involves more questioning and hinting, led to learning gains, the interactive tutoring style fostered more active student engagement and better performance on transfer questions.
Oh, that's interesting. So the more interactive and contingent the tutoring, the better the outcomes.
Yeah, it seems that way. And that really aligns with what we know about the importance of those core characteristics of scaffolding.
Right. Contingency fading and transfer of responsibility.
Exactly. So overall, the research suggests that scaffolding is an effective approach for supporting both metacognitive and cognitive learning outcomes.
That's good to hear. But what about affect? Like, does scaffolding have an impact on students' emotions, motivation, and engagement?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, there's not as much research on the effects of scaffolding on affect.
Oh, that's too bad. It seems like an important area to study.
It is, yeah. But one study by Turner and her colleagues did find a correlation between teachers' use of intrinsic support means and higher levels of student involvement in math classrooms.
Intrinsic support means, okay, what does that mean?
It's basically scaffolding strategies that are designed to support students' motivation and emotion.
Oh, I see. So like using questioning and feedback to encourage students and help them feel successful.
Exactly. And then Pratt and Savoy-Levine, in their study on long division, also looked at how different levels of support affected students' enjoyment of the task.
Oh, interesting. And what did they find?
They found that students who received no support at all reported significantly lower levels of enjoyment compared to those who received some form of scaffolding.
Oh, that makes sense. If you're struggling and you don't have any support, it's not going to be very enjoyable.
Exactly. So it seems like scaffolding can play a role in preventing frustration and maintaining a positive learning experience.
That's good to know. But overall, it seems like we need more research on the effects of scaffolding on affect.
Definitely. And it's also worth acknowledging that conducting rigorous research on scaffolding is challenging.
Oh, how so?
Well, because scaffolding is such a dynamic and context-dependent process, it's hard to measure and control in a research setting.
Right. It's not like you can just give students a standardized test to measure how well they're being scaffolded.
Exactly. And that brings us to another major challenge in the field of scaffolding research. It's measurement.
Measurement. Okay. So like how do you actually quantify and analyze scaffolding?
Right. And this is a challenge that researchers have been grappling with for a long time.
Why is it so difficult to measure scaffolding?
Well, because it's such a dynamic and interactive process.
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving in response to the students' needs and responses.
Right. It's not a static thing that you can just observe and record.
Exactly. And that makes it hard to capture and analyze in a standardized way.
So how have researchers been trying to measure scaffolding?
Well, they've used a variety of approaches. Some studies have used very detailed coding schemes to analyze transcripts of teacher-student interactions.
So they're breaking down the interactions into smaller units and looking for specific patterns.
Yeah, exactly. And other studies have used more qualitative approaches like observing classrooms and taking field notes.
Right, so getting a more holistic view of how scaffolding is happening.
Exactly. But regardless of the approach, measurement is a major challenge in scaffolding research.
And I guess that challenge is compounded by the fact that there's no single universally accepted definition of scaffolding.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, different researchers define scaffolding in slightly different ways, which makes it hard to compare findings across studies.
Right, because what one researcher considers scaffolding might not be considered scaffolding by another researcher.
Exactly. And that lack of consensus also makes it hard to develop standardized measurement tools.
So it seems like there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of measuring scaffolding effectively.
There is, yeah. But that doesn't mean that the research on scaffolding isn't valuable.
Right, we've learned a lot about scaffolding in the past decade, even if there are still some challenges to overcome.
Exactly. And the research has given us some really important insights into how to make scaffolding more effective. Well, for example, we've learned that it's really important to be contingent in our support, to constantly assess the student's understanding and adjust our support accordingly.
Right. Meet them where they're at.
Exactly. And we've also learned that it's important to fade our support gradually as the student becomes more competent.
Right. Don't just drop them in the deep end all of a sudden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've learned that it's important to explicitly transfer responsibility to the student, to
Yeah.
help them develop those metacognitive skills and become more independent learners.
Right. So scaffolding isn't just about helping them complete the task at hand. It's about helping them become better learners overall.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth reiterating those three core characteristics of effective scaffolding: contingency, fading, and transfer of responsibility.
Yeah, those are really the key takeaways.
And it's important to remember that they're interconnected. Like providing contingent support creates the conditions for fading, and successful fading leads to the transfer of responsibility.
Exactly. It's a cyclical process.
So as a final thought for our listeners, I'd like to pose this question. How can educators develop their own scaffolding intuition?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, like how can they develop that ability to respond effectively and sensitively to students' needs in the moment, to adjust their support on the fly, to know when to step in and when to step back?
Right, because scaffolding is so context dependent, there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. So it's about developing that intuitive understanding of how to best support individual learners in the moment.
And that's something that takes time, experience, and a lot of reflection.
It does, yeah. But it's a skill that's well worth cultivating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, effective scaffolding is all about empowering students to become independent, self-regulated learners.
And that's what we all want, right?
It is, yeah.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. I hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
Yeah, it was a great discussion. Thanks for having me.
And as always, thanks to our listeners for joining us. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you then.